There are crimes that end when the culprit is caught, and there are crimes that begin only then because the culprit is never caught. In the first, justice may sleep. In the second, imagination stays awake, fever-eyed, forever. And it is a peculiar truth, one fit to chill even the most rational mind, that the most frightening monster is not the one with claws and horns, but the one who can dissolve into the crowd and leave behind nothing but a name, like a whisper on cold glass. Jack the Ripper. Observe how the syllables themselves do the work of terror, short, sharp, insolent, as if the darkness had learned to sign its letters. You may be tempted to ask for dates, for proofs, for the precise geometry of streets. But if you seek only a ledger of facts, you will miss the more dreadful history. The history written inside the mind, when fear becomes a citizen, and the city becomes a nervous system. So let us descend, not into a timeline, but into a mood, into a quarter of London where lamps glow like sickly stars, and fog moves not as weather, but as intention. Welcome to Whitechapel, a name that sounds like clean stone, yet reeks, in memory, of damp brick, sour breath, and unwashed despair. The metropolis is not merely a place, it is an engine for anonymity. It teaches men how to be unknown. It permits the most terrible miracle, that a human soul can pass 1,000 faces and touch none. In such a city, the poor do not live, they persist. They persist in rooms that sweat. They persist under ceilings that press down like an accusation. They persist with the weary courage the comfortable never need to learn. And in that persistence, among narrow stairwells, crowded lodging houses, and late-night streets, fear found its perfect theater. Not the fear of thunder or plague, but the fear of a step behind you, a shadow beside you, a silence that answers your own breathing. At first, the whispers were small. A rumor is always small at the start, a moth at the edge of a lamp. People said a woman was found. People said it was violent. People said someone was prowling. But the city, accustomed to misery, has a thick skin. It has seen too much to startle easily. So it shrugged, the way exhausted people shrug at fresh tragedy. Yet the whispers returned, and then returned again. And soon, the whispers learned a word they did not deserve, a name, a title. And once a horror has a title, it becomes a citizen. The papers did what papers have always done. They gave the public a shape to fear. They fed it with ink, fattened it with speculation, sent it into parlors and pubs, into drawing rooms and tenements, until even a locked door felt like a thin promise. Do you understand the alchemy? The knife is terrible, certainly, but the idea of the knife, the thought that it might be waiting behind any corner, that idea is 1,000 knives. Fear does not remain inside the body, it becomes architecture. It changes how a street looks, how a stranger's glance feels, how the night itself breathes. Imagine the gaslit midnight, halos trembling in the fog like guilty consciences, cobblestones slick as if the street perspired, footsteps, always footsteps, and the uncertainty of whether they belong to a harmless passerby or to fate. The Ripper, whoever he was, understood the psychology of the modern city, that the crowd is not protection, it is camouflage. In my own contemplations, I once watched a figure I called the man of the crowd, an unreadable being who cannot be known, cannot be finished. And here, in Whitechapel, the crowd became not merely a multitude, but a mask worn by a predator. He could pass a constable and remain a rumor. He could drift beside respectable men and still be invisible. Because the city had already trained itself not to look too closely. Looking too closely is costly. It demands responsibility. The authorities, confronted with the unknown, did what men always do. They tried to measure it. They divided it into districts. They patrolled in lines as if order itself were a charm against chaos. But the city is a labyrinth. Streets twist like thoughts, alleys fold like secrets. To hunt one man among thousands is to chase smoke through a chimney. So suspicion spread, not as light spreads, but as rot spreads. Neighbors watched neighbors. Strangers were accused for wearing the wrong silence. Every foreign accent became a candidate for nightmare. Every solitary figure became a question. Fear, when it cannot name its enemy, names everyone. Yet there is a deeper horror than the failure to catch a killer, the possibility that he did not need brilliance, only opportunity. The darkness, the poverty, the indifference, the hurried lives, these things are not neutral. They are conditions. A society can build corners where human beings are treated as disposable, and then act surprised when evil takes shelter there. And then come the letters, those black little performances of ink. Whether all were genuine matters less than what they did to the mind of the city. They transformed murder into spectacle and fear into an audience. A crime becomes more contagious when it is narrated, because narration invites participation. The public leans in, the public argues, the public consumes terror and calls it curiosity. Tell me, listener, are you not leaning in now? Here we approach the most unsettling question. What kind of mind does this? Was he a surgeon of the streets, a butcher of the alley, a gentleman with a spotless coat and a double life, or merely a phantom made of rumor? We cannot know, but we can recognize the shape of the impulse. There is in man an imp of the perverse, a daemon not of desire but of contradiction, a compulsion to do the wrong thing precisely because it is wrong. Not for gain, not for necessity, but because the soul, sick with itself, longs to prove its own freedom in the most hideous manner possible. Consider the terror of that. Cruelty not as a means, but as an end. Evil performed like a private ritual. And rituals demand repetition. Each repetition demands a stronger sensation, a sharper proof, a deeper plunge. Thus cruelty becomes a drug. Thus the killer becomes the slave of his own appetite. Now imagine his nights, not as sensational scenes, but as a human fever. He moves through fog and shadow with the calm of familiarity. He knows which corners are blind, which doors are unwatched, which hours are loneliest. He passes drunks, lovers, quarrels, prayers. He is invisible not because he is supernatural, but because he is ordinary enough to pass. That is the terror modern life manufactures. The monster can wear the same hat as you. Respectable people cling to explanations. They say it must be a madman, as if madness were a tidy box. They say it must be a foreigner, as if evil needed a passport. They say it must be a doctor, because they want the horror to be specialized, recognizable, containable. They say anything to convince themselves they could identify evil on sight. But evil is often unremarkable in appearance. It may speak softly, it may hold a door, it may smile, it may pray. And sometimes the most chilling truth is this: the mind that commits atrocities is not always roaring with lunacy. It may be cold, precise, and quiet. It may even feel, at moments, nothing at all. You recoil at that, do you not? Because if the killer is pure madness, you can exile him from humanity and feel safe. You can say he is not one of us. But if he is composed, if he is merely a man, then the question becomes unbearable. What in the human soul allows such darkness to exist behind a normal face? In Whitechapel, that question became a sickness. People began to dream differently. They walked faster. Women hurried with keys clenched in their hands. Men offered to escort strangers, not always out of kindness, but out of terror of being helpless. The city itself seemed to listen. The night felt intentional. Every alley became a mouth that might speak your name. The Ripper did not only kill bodies, he wounded the public mind. He taught the streets a new language, dread. And then, as abruptly as the fever began, it ceased. No grand finale.
No revelation, no closure, just silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of uncertainty. The worst ending for the human brain, which would rather accept a dreadful truth than endure an unanswered question. So what remains? A name, a legend, a shadow in history that refuses to stand still long enough to be measured. And now I will speak plainly to you, as if confessing. Perhaps the true Ripper is not only a man. Perhaps the true Ripper is also the city that allows people to become invisible. The part of society that lets suffering hide in plain sight, that treats certain lives as footnotes. For when a civilization builds labyrinths of neglect, it should not be surprised when monsters learn the map. Do not mistake me. I do not absolve the murderer with philosophy. No, I only insist that the crime is not confined to a blade. The crime is also the appetite for terror, the thrill of headlines, the public hunger to stare into darkness and call it entertainment. Yes, you too are implicated, in the smallest, most human way, by wanting to know. But perhaps that wanting can be purified. Perhaps it can become vigilance, a refusal to let the fog do all the hiding. So when you hear the name Jack the Ripper, do not imagine only an alley and a shadow. Imagine a city looking into a mirror and finding the mirror refuses to show a face. Imagine a crowd so thick it becomes a mask. Imagine fear becoming ordinary, and therefore powerful. The fog of Whitechapel has long drifted away. The gas lamps have died. The papers have yellowed. And still the question perches on the mind like a blackbird, patient and impossible to drive off. Who was he? And more dreadful, how many times, in how many cities has he worn a new name?